Hello again. I've spoken of the way in which mass immigration has increased waiting times to see doctors or get appointments at hospitals and so on. This is not the whole picture, of course. COVID also has played a role in the last few years in restricting our access to a doctor. The difficulties, though, lie a lot deeper than either of those two problems. It may seem bizarre, but the origins of the crisis in getting medical care, or even seeing your doctor, lie in the women's liberation movement of the 1960s. I wonder if anybody under the age of 60 or 70 is familiar with the expression the doctor's rounds. At one time in this country, once a GP had finished seeing patients for the day at his surgery, he would then set out and visit housebound patients on his rounds, just travelling around the district, visiting people confined to bed. Imagine that. Your GP coming round to your house to see you as a routine operation. This is not a false memory. It really did used to be that way. That was in the days when seeing your doctor did not involve ringing up at 8 in the morning and finding that you're number 23 in the queue. You just turned up at the doctor's without an appointment and sat in the waiting room. What went wrong? Well, it's very awkward to say this, but equality was what happened, and it turned out to be a very bad thing for the British Health Service. At one time, 99% of doctors were men. They worked full time at their jobs, and their wives often acted as their receptionists or secretaries. That was very common with family doctors, or GPs as we now call them. Some doctors became consultants and surgeons, while others devoted themselves to research. In every case, these men worked full time. They had to, really, because they needed to support not only themselves, but their wives and children as well. Then things began to change. People asked themselves why doctors should all be men. After all, only an idiot would claim that women were less intelligent than men, or that they were not able to pass examinations as well as men, or be able to qualify as doctors as easily. All these things are self evidently true. But although it's not popular to say so these days, all this overlooked one simple fact: men and women are different, and they want different things. Women care more about babies and children, for instance. Perhaps they shouldn't. Perhaps men should care as much about babies and children as women, but the fact is that they don't. You see, all that worked out very nicely when women stayed at home and took care of their babies and looked after their children. But it doesn't work out quite so well when the mother is working full time. As a result of the drive for equality, when it came to the National Health Service, more than half of GPs are now women. The thing is, though, that women doctors prefer to work part time, and this is particularly the case once they have children. After taking maternity leave, 80% of women return to work part time. Women doctors tend to retire early as well. What this means is that instead of having a family doctor, one whom you would always see when you went to the doctors, someone you could build up a relationship with and who would know you, who's often on Christian name terms with you. These days you have to take pot luck and see different people each time, none of whom really knows you. It also means that medical schools have to train two female doctors in order to fill one full-time post in the NHS. This problem is getting worse with more and more women retiring earlier and earlier after working part-time for years. This is why we have health centres and practices these days, rather than just a doctor living in the next street using his front room as a surgery. It's why even before COVID and before the sharp rise in immigration, it was getting harder and harder to see a doctor and almost impossible to see the same one every time. Of course, if a doctor's only working part-time, she won't want to go out in the evening calling on patients. She wants to be at home with her children. This same kind of trend is also happening with dentists too. I'm sure the viewers have noticed how many dentists now are women, and they might also be aware that most of them only work part-time as well. This approach creates problems too for specialist doctors, surgeons, orthopedics, neurology, that kind of thing. At one time, men would devote their lives to working full time as surgeons or neurologists or something, so that by the time they retired, when they were 65, they might have 30 years' experience in one particular field. They were experts. Not anymore. Women tend not to do this because it involves very intensive full time work and unsocial hours. So they would rather poodle along just working part time as GPs. Other doctors would go into research and spend their entire working life studying cancer or diabetes. This too doesn't fit in well with the mentality of part time working, maternity leave, and early retirement. So medical research in this country has suffered as well. Nobody really likes to talk about the way that making medicine more attractive to women has ended up wrecking it in this country because it sounds perilously close to misogyny. For those of us, though, who believe that there are essential differences between men and women and that they value different things, want different things out of life, then it all makes perfect sense. The National Health Service ran a lot better when most of the doctors were men and their wives looked after the family, allowing the man to focus his attentions more on medicine. The increase in female doctors has had no beneficial influence on the provision of healthcare in this country, and a number of clear and measurable adverse effects.